As a journalist who has covered the finance sector over the last 5 years, I've had the opportunity to interview and engage with some of the best minds in the space. Leaving big bank earnings reports to the boring traditional media firms, I'll focus on the tech-savvy apps, digital investing platforms, challenger banks, and payment giants to drive relevant content that looks forward to disruption instead of fearing it. I'm Nicole Casperson, Fintech journalist, and this is What the Fintech. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of What the Fintech, a podcast for fintech professionals who want to shape the future of our industry with innovation and inclusion. I'm your host, Nicole Casperson, and today I'm sitting down with a true pioneer in fintech investing. With us is Amy Nauiokas, the founder and CEO of Anthemis Group. She's also the founder and CEO of Archer Gray, a media production company. Amy is committed to investing in diverse founders, especially women and women of color. In fact, she's also the CEO and chair of Anthemis Digital Acquisitions, a 100% female-led and ESG-focused special purpose acquisition company. I could spend all day sharing her ridiculously impressive street cred, so just trust me when I say Amy is the real deal. Amy, welcome to What the Fintech.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. That was such a nice intro. I appreciate it.
Oh, you are welcome, and thank you so much for joining. So happy to have you a part of the show and my guest list in this community. To start, where are you located right now? Where are you working from? You're working from home with this beautiful cherry blossom background.
We are back at our office in Lower Manhattan, our New York office. And it's a very quiet day today. We have we've gone back to work remote first, so there's no requirement to be here, and people kind of wander in and out as time goes on. And so I'm sitting here very quiet and alone in our New York office today.
Well, that's kind of nice. It's nice to have those days, right? Because then you can kind of feel like you actually get work done when you aren't shuffling around in meetings all the time and having that quiet. Sometimes I'll just wake up earlier just to have that a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, and I don't know that this is true of all moms, but I think for me, one of the unbelievably challenging but yet interesting kind of moment of self-awareness for me over the sort of work from home last couple of years was that I think I'm probably slightly different on intensity levels as a mom than I am as a sort of, CEO of multiple companies. And it's probably not maybe not as far removed as my own reality, but and you're standing 15 to 20 feet from my daughter and I'm, talking about we're going to do this and we're going to do this and this is great and we should try this and let's do this. And then I walk out, I'm like, hey, do you want to go make a diorama with mommy? And she's like, absolutely not. There's clearly it is not a person you want to go and play in the craft room with, right? And so I think I started to realize that coming back to work to some degree, because I have the privilege to do so, allows me to kind of wipe work off of me when I walk back in the house at night. And that's been good for our family.
Yeah. I mean, it's totally just depends on who you are and how, your preferences and how you feel. Because I always felt the same way before the pandemic. I was majorly into being in the office and being in a newsroom and having, that energy. And I would stay late at work because the minute I got home, that was it. I took off my skin, my work skin, and I was Nicole, the human who binge watches whatever on Netflix and eats my dinner on the couch or whatever I was doing.
Shut it down. Yeah.
Exactly.
I do hope, and I actually, we talk about this all the time at Anthemis. One of our core values is bring your weird, which is, kind of a goal of ours that you don't have to be any different at work than you would be anywhere else in your life because weird is accepted here and it's welcome here. But I do think, we're getting better generally at appreciating the value of having and bringing our unique selves to our workplace and creating environments where people can bring their unique selves to, but it's still not quite there yet, and I think particularly when you work in financial services around a lot of, very certain types of personalities, sometimes you do have to put a bit of a guard on, and that can be really exhausting. Certainly after 30 plus years of doing it, it can be extremely exhausting. But I'm hopeful that we're going to be seeing a lot more of, again, you said, as you introduced me, that authenticity, in how we spend our time and our days. It's important that we do it authentically. And hopefully those shields and those skins and those guards will come down.
Right. I'm just learning how to let my guard come down through this podcast, through my newsletter, through putting my own, name and face out there that isn't just behind, a corporate legacy publication brand. So,
Mm.
and hoping people appreciate my voice in that manner. And luckily, the response has been great. And I have women and amazing people like yourself on the show, so that is awesome. But speaking of kind of getting into a little bit of your background and your personal story, because I do believe that is so critical to your success as a leader. I'm so curious if during your upbringing there was a moment or a series of moments that really fueled this passion of yours for uplifting diverse voices.
Mm. Yeah, I think about this all the time. In large part, as I talk to my own children and the discussion we have in our family. We're a family of six children who share multiple different personality traits, but also share different cultures and different races and certainly different nationalities. And so the conversation of diversity is kind of front and center all the time in our family. And I didn't grow up like that. I grew up in a very small town in Connecticut, kind of the part of Connecticut that most people don't appreciate exists, right? Not the kind of Westports of the world, but kind of in the that line between industrial and farmland Connecticut. And we did not have in our community a particularly diverse community of people, and certainly it wasn't something that I saw on a regular basis. In my kind of day to day life, the idea that people could look different than me because they didn't. And I remember, and this is going to seem probably, I'm sure I'm dating myself. I can remember watching television, one night when I was either supposed to be doing homework or probably was doing homework in front of the television. And I think because both my parents worked, there wasn't a lot of, there was probably a lot of television I was watching that I probably shouldn't have been watching in the 70s and 80s growing up. And I can remember watching a news feed about the Central Park Five. And I probably was, maybe 15, 14, 15, somewhere around there. And just watching the news clip, and it was, Channel 5 News, New York, outside. We were getting the New York news feed, and they were telling the story about these animals, really, is how they were describing it on the newscast. And they were my age. And something clicked with me, and I went, I sort of just asked, like, it just didn't make sense that kids my age could do what they were being described as doing. And somehow that to me was like an aha moment of sorts, where I thought, why is this happening? Is this real? And I somehow, probably well before the world figured out, questioned it and questioned it in a way that was incredibly honest and very raw, because I was still quite young and I didn't have any of the tools. And that to me felt like a moment where my eyes opened. And it just kind of led me down a very strange path of learning more about the Black American experience in a way that my outlet was reading, because that's what I had. And I started to sort of search out things here and there, and found myself learning more about completely oddly going from the Black American experience and jumping right back to the African experience, and becoming very uniquely obsessed with African history and culture, and just everything that was, of the mind. And I ask my kids all the time, when you're younger and you're growing up, is there one thing that whenever you would see it in a newspaper, you'd have to read the article, or you see a book in the bookstore and you'd have to read it? And for me, from the age of 15 onward, it was anything having to do with the continent of Africa. And I actually do think it had a lot to do with not understanding the journey that I was being presented by the news media at that moment, when the Central Park Five was being persecuted.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. I mean, it's really interesting and just telling that, at a young age, at a very like formidable age, you, someone that maybe wasn't as connected, right? Someone that wasn't exposed to this level of diversity could see something on the news and be like, oh, that's just wrong. Like, and it hurts and it like kind of hits you and it hits different, right? And I think when you don't grow up around diversity, you either, find yourself way more comfortable just ignoring it, or ignoring that you're, not surrounded by anyone different, and just going along the ride, or lost in the sauce, if you will. Or you are someone like yourself who says, this is wrong, and I'm gonna like learn and read books and research about what the F is going on here, because this is like a crazy thing and it should not be happening. I can resonate with that because I went to a high school. I'm originally from California, and then I moved to Texas when I was a teen, went to high school there and college. And, I went from having a large Asian American community in California and Orange County with me, to just going to a high school that's like 98% white. So I became this like odd person out. I became like this exotic being, and I'd never really experienced that. And that happened to me around the same age, right? Like around 13, 14, 15. And I was like confused, and you get all those like weird antsy like feelings, and you don't understand what's going on. And then but it's what made me who I am today, right? It's what fueled my intense pride for, being a half Filipino woman, for what makes me different and all that good stuff. So like it's interesting the way those like moments really like stick with you, and help us become the wonderful people we are today, despite them being such, horrific circumstances. It's
And
crazy.
to appreciate, kind of, early on, because I grew up in a family that, from a socioeconomic perspective, was not well off. I was first generation college student. My parents were first generation immigrants. There was not a mechanism by which, to me, it was about like the race question. It felt like it would have been really easy and simple to say, oh, well, it's about being poor and not poor, and then that's the answer. But it was so clearly obvious to me as I started to dig in that it had not that it didn't have anything to do with economics, because it all has to do with economics, but that there was something much bigger
Mhm.
in that in the challenges that I faced as a younger person who lived in white skin and had the privilege of living in white skin versus anybody around me that didn't. And it was, and it was the fuel that just wanted me to, I guess drove me to learn more. And but it can be, it's very similarly, and I don't think that I know this isn't the reason why I did it. I really was doing it because I just wanted to go deeper and deeper. And when I got to college, I studied African studies as part of my international studies major, and I had an opportunity to go abroad, and so I went abroad too and lived for a year in Western Africa and Cameroon. And that experience in the early 90s, which would be very different today given how much more global the world is, talk about being fish out of water, right? Like showing up in a country as a 19-year-old white girl from central Connecticut, and literally being looked at and ogled for my difference,
Mhm.
which I had never experienced before. And it was so incredibly eye opening and so wonderfully perspective building, that I think it absolutely fueled, my life's goals of trying to fight for a more fair and equitable society, because that felt crappy. Like it felt
Yeah.
really crappy.
Right.
And
Right.
but I understood it, right? And I learned so much from it, and the relationships that I built there, and the people that I met, and the experience I had was so incredibly life affirming, and certainly has driven almost everything that I've done professionally.
And your background is wildly impressive, from being one of the most powerful and influential women in finance leadership to also working on Oscar and Golden Globe nominated films to amplify those stories of those traditionally ignored. Between the media and finance slash VC industries, which has been a harder area to uplift women and people of color, and why?
Oh, it's a great question. I think when I started my career in a very traditional Wall Street manner. I started as a baby banker. I went and got my MBA. I did all the things to give myself the pedigree that one gets to be able to do the things they want to do on Wall Street. And I, for sure, noticed the level of the lack of inclusivity in kind of the Wall Street sense, growing up on the street in the 90s and early noughties. But it wasn't until I was a little bit more senior that I actually felt it was my job to do something about it. And not that I wasn't conscious of it, but I think like everyone
Right.
growing up in that space, you put your head down and you did your job because there was only going to be one of you elevated, and
Yeah.
you weren't sure which one it was going to be, and it was probably not going to be the squeaky one, right? Because that wasn't encouraged. And I think I was lucky enough, or I guess you could say, I think it was a lot of it was luck, but I put myself in a position very early on that I got very senior very fast. So by the time I was 34, I was running one of the largest retail brokerage shops in Europe. And I was sitting in London, and I think it was at that moment where I started to, take coffees with people on my team, and do events and small dinners, and I started to realize how little mentorship and example there was of somebody like me in the community, and how important that was to that community, that I actually did more work on that, right? And I think a lot of
Mhm.
times as women, even today, like there are a lot of folks that will not want to be called out for being a woman leader, or being
Mhm.
a woman venture capitalist, because quite frankly, I'm a leader and I'm a venture capitalist, and that it doesn't really matter what my gender is.
Right.
But I think there was this turning point for me at age 34 where I thought, God, if I don't do this from my position, then there will be no impact had, and there'll be no purpose, and everybody after me is not going to have it easier. And I had it really hard because nobody before me leaned back to
Mhm.
help me out. And so for
Right.
me, that was that moment of lift around, wanting to lean in and give back to the community, and to just be a voice, as much as I possibly could. And so I think once I made that decision, I was pleasantly surprised at how incredibly um, welcome it was with a certain community within Wall Street. Um, but also, it was the mechanism by which I could make a decision to say, I'm not staying here and doing it this way. Like, if I'm going to make real change, I need to do it myself. And so my decision to to drop out of the corporate game to go build my own thing so that I could see that, be the change I wanted to see, was in large part because some of the struggle I had, being kind of the one and the only, at that moment. Um, but, and this is sort of getting back to your question about which one's different and easier. I think in some strange way, when I made the move to start Anthemis and then simultaneously started Archer Gray, which in itself was a crazy thing to do, but I kind of thought one of them wouldn't work, and here we are. Um, the kind of difference in the media space was that there was a perception that women had power, and a perception that women's voices were heard, and a perception that if there are women in movies, then they must be part of the community. And it was a lot more difficult, I think, to make the change in the media space, than it was in financial services in some ways, because in financial services the expectation was that there were no women, that women. So it almost was like you could have the conversation, where when you move into the media space, and this was late 2009, it wasn't, we're not talking the 80s, there were still very few people buying films that looked different than a typical white man, like, and that makes a difference, right? And we all know that's how it works. Like, diversity happens when you diversify the networks and the people that you're around. But if the same people keep doing the same things over and over again, you do not get a different result. And so it was really, when I entered the media space, it was not with a distinct inclination to only make films that mattered and that elevated voices. But I got there pretty quickly because I was like, well, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to, join in and do anything but this.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, the first thing I will say is that I am so happy that I'm also doing what I'm doing because apparently that is the right strategy, given your story, right? So thank you. I feel so validated right now, for branching out and realizing, right? Like, if you want to be the change that you wish to see in the world, you do have to go and do it yourself. And like, honestly, sometimes you can't just like change a legacy publication, or you can't change like a legacy maybe media company or whatever it is, you have to go out and build it yourself and then have everyone listen to you from that point of view. And it actually is interesting how much respect you get for something like that. And I feel really fortunate to, if someone like yourself hadn't taken the steps you took, I wouldn't have a pathway to follow, and that's exactly what you've done. And I wouldn't have this like, confidence, right, if you will, or hearing your story, right? And I hope that all of, not just the women, but anyone, right, that has felt like they didn't have a path for them listens to this and knows that you can, and there's it's possible. And the challenges we face are across all industries, right? It hits financial services really hard. And it is interesting to think about how, like, because in finance there's already like it's men, like, and that's clear. And then you go over to like the movie or entertainment media and think, oh well, women are given so much platform, but what kind of platform is that, right? Is it the like, but what do we do now, as the woman looks to the man and like asks for help, or like is the damsel in distress, or there's like all of these things that the media has perpetuated of women and who they are. So yeah, I mean, that is such a, I'm so glad I asked that question, because it's so interesting to think about. And it oddly makes, I think, us in like finance and fintech not feel so almost alone, right? Because it's across all industries, but it also amplifies the issue, and amplifies how we have to, right, build that foundation of change so that other industries can, tap in as well, because we're all connected.
Yeah, I think if we've learned anything in the last couple of years, which I think some of us have, some of us are still working on it. I think what we've realized is that systems change is hard. We're not talking about kind of one-off examples and one-off solutions. We're talking about dismantling a system that was not built for or by most of us ever, right? And I think the beauty of the work that we get to do at Anthemis in early stage investing, which is a big part of our platform, I always say, look, the fact that insert any bank here is still not quite getting diversity right, after being built for and by white men a couple hundred years ago, isn't super shocking. But if we build new companies inside of fintech and we don't do it right, then that's on us, because there's way too many great ideas and way too many unbelievably talented white women, people of color, people with different, backgrounds and cognitive differences out there, that are willing to put the hard work into building really great new models and companies. It just might mean we have to look a little harder to find them. And I get so frustrated by how many people talk about the pipeline problem, right? It's sort of like,
It's painful.
yeah, it's a pipeline problem. It's like, I'm pretty sure it's not a pipeline problem, right? I mean, I'm sitting on top of a beautiful platform that, just by nature of hiring a team that is diverse, has managed to deploy 40% of our capital into companies that are either backed by women or people of color in fintech. So if there's a pipeline problem, my friend, like, I'd be seeing it. And you want to just have to look a little harder. Or more importantly, don't look harder, just look a little smarter, right? Because if you open your eyes, you're going to find that there's no pipeline problem.
Right. No, the pipeline problem ish chatter is a bit frustrating. There are plenty of women and women of color and diverse founders in fintech. Clearly, right? You have them a part of your platform, and so yeah, it's crazy. Or like looking at a speaker faculty and it being like all men, or all white people, when I've seen speaker faculties of like full women and full like diverse people, like it's possible. And from my point of view, you had to be intentional about that inclusion. Like and I've tried to tell in my past roles, like other journalists, this, they're like, well, how do I get like more diverse sources? And I'm like, you literally ask, like, tell the PR person, I want a woman to talk about this. Or, if I reach out to someone who is like a big name in the industry, I really applaud like a male CEO or a male founder who will say, you know what, I could talk about this, but really, sponsors a female colleague that maybe is their COO or CFO or whatever that could, I think they could tell the story better, or like, give like that kind of platform sharing, if you will, or whatever it is, right? Like we need the sponsorship, we need the allyship, we need every single person on board, like male, female, whatever. Like no matter what you identify as, everyone needs to be on board here, and you have to be so intentional about it. And like that's what I did. Even just like the current guest list I have on this podcast, it's
You are
50.
rocking, by the way. Your guest list is like the who's who. I'm loving. I feel so privileged to be part
Oh,
of
thank
it.
you. Oh my gosh, are you kidding? You're like yes. Thank you, thank you. Oh my gosh, I feel so privileged to have you and all of the guests.
Which is great. And that's, I think it's like we're creating a little Anthemis portfolio company club on your podcast.
I know, and I didn't even know it. It just so happens that, right? It only made sense, right? Because I'm intentionally looking, like I chose the first person that I am airing with on purpose, like very intentionally. And my list of guests, like I am right now at like 60% women interviews, 40% male. All of my all of my interviews are people of color except for two, and both of them are women, and they're Levy. Like, and you guys are amazing. Like, that's what and of
Well,
course
and
I'm.
that's how it happens too, right? Like it's not a it's not accidental that we can, that we define what representation looks like in any particular industry, right? So, we have this really unique opportunity as fintech leaders. Many of us ended up in fintech because there wasn't really a place for us in the other part of fin, right? And so by nature, there might be a lot more diverse talent sitting in the fintech community than in other parts of financial services. And so if that's the case, and if we continue to have the wind behind our sails of the industry and coming to age of sorts, we can be really intentional about the picture that we show of this industry, because it doesn't all look like what crypto looks like, right? And then we should remind people of that on a regular basis. So I applaud what you're doing, because I think it's a great way to 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 kind of again be the change we want to see.
Thank you so much. I do want to jump into Anthemis and all of the great work you're doing. We already kind of spoiled a little bit of it with my guest list that is fairly largely made up of some of your portfolio. But will you give our listeners a quick overview of Anthemis, and maybe even share the story of how you went from overlooked to on trend today?
Hmm. Yeah, so my partner Sean and I found each other in the mid noughties. We kind of have a laughing Seinfeld reference joke, because he referred to me when we first met as his Newman to his Seinfeld, and I'm not sure
Oh.
why he got to be Seinfeld and I got to be Newman, but he basically said that every time he was trying to do something at the bank that he was working at, I would just show up and do it just before he got to do it, and he couldn't figure out why. And we finally met. I laughed at him and I said, Sean, you've been blogging back in the day when blogs were a thing. You've been blogging about this forever, and I think I might be the only person paying attention to what you're saying, but I'm just executing faster than you are. And there was this moment of like, oh, maybe there's something in us working together. And we bonded over, our mutual frustration of in 2007, trying to convince the powers that be in large financial institutions that the world was changing, that digitization of the markets was going to matter, that now what's become fintech, was a thing. And we agreed that there was no reason to keep pushing that proverbial elephant up the hill, and that we might be able to do this on our own. And so we jumped off, and we started the company, Anthemis Group. And we started it very deliberately as a holding company and a investment platform. And our goal from the very beginning was to deploy financial, but also human and intellectual capital in the service of transformation inside of financial services. And that financial services and transformation of the financial system was meant to include, and was largely going to be driven by, creating a more resilient, a more fair, and a more equitable system for all who participated in it. And I do believe, as most things happen fairly serendipitously, that two things happen that kind of helped drive us and motivate us. The first was that we didn't know each other very well. And so as such, when you start to like attach your train cars to each other and realize that, you have no clue what you've just done, you've both quit your jobs and you're about to start a company together and you barely even know the person's last name, that we spent a considerable amount of time really talking about what was important to us from a values perspective. And the alignment of our values from the very beginning really served as the foundation of what we built with the Anthemis group. We knew we were doing something that was going to be a very long process. It wasn't going to happen overnight. Systems change does not happen in 5, 10, 15 years. It happens in 100 years. And so we figured this was going to be, we're playing the long game here. And that as such, our goal was to be much more collaborative with the industry than to be combative. We knew that this would be an evolution, not a revolution, and that felt to us at the moment when a lot of people were talking about disruption to be the right way to play it. It also helped us leverage our already existing relationships inside of a large ecosystem of financial services players and bring it to the Valley, which, to be fair, wasn't happening in 2008, right? People weren't talking between Wall Street and California, just teenagers. And then the second thing we committed to in those early days was that we wanted to do significantly more good than evil in the work we were doing, and that would guide us away from things that felt and looked predatory, which in the early days of financial services technology was a lot of stuff. And that would be kind of our, we'd have a very high bar, which now is being defined very clearly as ESG. But that for us, that sort of virtuous cycle outcome was incredibly important. And then finally, that we would build the team and deploy capital way more diversely and inclusively than anybody had done it before. In financial services, in the industry generally. And then we just went off and went. And like I said, we started as a platform and as a holding co. And we never intentionally intended to build an asset management company. But I think what happened for us, was that we were so far ahead of the industry. We had a few years where we could do that. We could be a little bit more like, oh, we'll raise a little capital here, we'll take our own capital here, and we'll just invest in companies as they come along. But, we were counting on two hands how many companies would be described as fintech, right? And so we seeded in the early days Zoopla and Climate Corp, and we seeded Seed Camp in Europe, which is the sort of European equivalent to Y Combinator. And then kind of as time went on, we seeded eToro and Betterment and Carta and Currency Cloud and kind of all these companies that are now coming alive, so to speak. But we didn't have to go and raise capital through kind of a traditional LP model. We were quite, thoughtfully. We actually used to joke that one of the names before we decided to call it Anthemis, that I wanted to call the company, was working capital, because I just felt like we had to always prove ourselves, right? And I think, we can talk about this in a minute, but like coming full circle, that's really what's separating the winners from the losers right now, is those people that are willing to do more than just write a check. And we did that right from the very beginning. And it wasn't until about 2014, 15, when the world started to catch up on this thesis, that we really felt that we needed to be a bit more nimble around our ability to raise capital and deploy capital. And we built our kind of full platform asset management business now. So the business itself deploys capital, human, intellectual, and financial, in companies as early as Venture Studio, where we support currently exclusively female founders, and then through to kind of early stage, which we go up to B. Then we skip over all that other stuff, DEF, which, for all the right reasons. And we launched our first SPAC this fall to work in the public markets. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey. And it's kind of been amazing that in the last couple of years, we went from being the outsiders who were often referred to as the weirdos to being the insiders who are now authentically doing the things that everybody is trying to get credit for. So that feels pretty good, but it does come with a significant amount of responsibility, I think. I think we have a responsibility to keep the bar high. We have a responsibility to, showcase how the good guys do it. And that's sort of what we try to do every single day. And I think our style and our reputation more in the last year than it probably has ever mattered, as things have gotten more competitive. And I feel really proud of the team, and generally kind of the work that we do, but also the way we do it, which is hugely different, I think, than the majority of folks that are deploying capital these days.
Oh, yeah, amazing. And so it goes back to, bring your weird to work. I love that, that is kind of a part of your mantra today because, right, you've gone through this process of being the weirdo and then now being the trendsetter. Um, and it's like, well, it took whatever, however many like years or decades or whatever, but like here we are. And but be having that perseverance to never go against what you believe in, no matter what it meant, no matter what anyone said about you. I mean, that says a lot. And I think the Gen Zers today are like really good at it. But when you're old, like in the generations before, we didn't necessarily always have. We didn't always have. Technically, I'm a millennial. We didn't have the we didn't really have like mentors or
Yeah.
sponsors for the most part that kind of told us, hey, like you don't need to fit the mold. Instead, like even us millennials, we didn't do a great job. Like Gen Z is really crushing it with the whole authenticity aspect because like millennials were trying to get there, but like still too scared to like make some noise.
Yeah.
So I appreciate kind of this like full blown like social media generation who isn't scared to say what's up. And but you've been doing it well before that any of this happened, and so kudos to you and that. I mean, we are approaching year end, which is kind of the perfect time to summarize how Anthemis has grown and developed in the past year and kind of reflect on all of that success. So from either January to today, or honestly the whole way through, what is the initiative, moment, area of growth, or whatever investment that maybe makes you the most proud, and why? Is it the special purpose acquisition company deal, or
Oh gosh, I don't know that I would pick one investment per se or one moment per se. And I guess that's kind of asking like a parent of multiple children to pick their favorite child, right? I
yeah,
can't do that. But it has been such a massive year for the industry, by far the largest that we've seen in terms of capital deployed. I think that the third quarter alone had somewhere north of 900 transactions in fintech. And I think the players that have come in this year driving the flurry of activity have presented some challenges, right? Have really, given the industry some pause. The no doubt that these kind of big, the Tigers and the Coaches and that sort of SoftBanks of the world coming in and kind of compressing some of the early stage investments. I liken it to like dropping a massive boulder into an already bubbling pot of water and then displacing, kind of a lot of the VC players that were doing it before and have been doing it for a while, and frankly, creating a lot of noise and anxiety amongst otherwise rational founders. And so weaving through that has been a bit of a challenge. But I think from an Anthemis perspective, I've been overwhelmed and quite frankly grateful at how well we've played inside of that vortex this year. I think maybe we've lost one trade to the big dudes, so to speak, and quite frankly, we've won a few where our valuation hasn't been the highest, and that's saying a lot about our brand, our reputation, again, our style. And I think this year alone, we've done 70 investments since January. We've closed a couple funds. We launched our first SPAC. We've put money in the hands of probably the most diverse group of founders that are kind of existing today. And to me, that is what I'm most proud of and what I'm most excited about, right? There's so much more opportunity to come for next year. And I think we're just getting started as a team and as an industry. Again, I talk about having responsibility to continue to lead authentically into the new year as things sort of continue to be a little bit up and down, as I think we've seen with the markets recently, like they will be. But yeah, I just think, I guess the general feeling, there's a little bit of tiredness across the board, as
yeah,
you would do when you're going into kind of going at war every day. But I
yeah.
think the team generally is feeling very proud of the work that we've done, the impact we've made. I mean, we are, we've hit that magical mark of well over $1 billion under management. across a whole host of different products and stages. And that's a pretty important moment for an asset manager. And it makes me super excited about, the dry powder we go into next year with. But again, it's not just about capital, because there's so much money out there right now, that the biggest threat, I think, to the equity capital markets and even the debt capital markets next year for founders isn't about accessing capital. It's about partnering with people that are actually going to help you spend that capital responsibly and draw it out in a way that's going to allow you to build your business, in case the market trips up, because it very likely will. We've been on such a massive bull run for so long now in this sector. I think we can expect that there are going to be some hiccups, and we want to make sure that our portfolio companies certainly are prepared for that journey, but that we're providing them not just with the check, but the work and the guidance, and the support and the ecosystem connectivity that allows them to manage through the ups and downs.
Right, exactly. I mean, just kudos to you and all of the success. And I appreciate what you say, right? It's you are doing the work, like capital THE, as we say, to really make that difference and put money into diverse founders' hands. And those stats are dismal, right? The 1% of global VC funding going to women or women of color founders. But you're like, you're fighting the good fight every single day to make that numbers change, and that's what
I
it
will
takes.
say there's some good news coming out of the end of the year stats. I haven't officially wanted to say this yet because, God forbid it's not true, but it looks like this will end up being a banner year for female founders, that we are finally seeing some progress now. I think we're talking about, I think this is like a 200% increase year over year on money that's gone to female founders. Now, mind you,
Well,
going from 2 to 4 is not, particularly helpful, but look, there's some good signs, right? And we need to keep the pressure on. We need to keep the pace on. LPs need to be continuing to force GPs to answer to their sort of diversity stats, and we just keep needing to keep doing the good work, because we're making some progress, and that's, I think our SPAC is a perfect example of that. We've been asked a lot of folks are questioning the value of the SPAC market right now, and there's a lot of noise around whether or not it's still and should be a viable product, and we're incredibly bullish. I think that the market needed to cool off this summer, but I think the concept and the ability to use a SPAC in partnership with the right company is a huge opportunity for fintech, and certainly for really any kind of VC that's got that ability to sponsor something like this. And we did it deliberately, with an all-female team, because we wanted to stand out and make sure that people understood, what we stood for and who we were. But also, by nature of who we are, we're going to do it in partnership. And I think part of the reason why this product, the SPAC, is becoming so interesting to proper VCs is that it's no longer about doing a transaction, right? It's about finding partnerships and relationships and building that trust over time, because you do have time, right? You don't have to, you've got 18 months to 2 years to do a transaction. You don't have to do it tomorrow. But there's a lot that can be done in that process if you meet the right company or the right companies, to go on that journey together. But it has to be a journey. This is the most important thing that founders will ever do, professionally with their company, is bring it public. And so if being in the public markets is part of your journey, being able to do it slowly and with a partner that actually, can provide you with a significant amount of extra value and guidance, is a huge opportunity. And I think, we're going to see 2022 bringing a lot of those, not a lot, but a handful of those opportunities, to life again. And I think you're going to see it be a more common use of capital, in fintech.
oh, good. And about time, right? I mean, it's about kind of making things a lot less transactional and much more personal. And, actually using that moral compass to decide who you partner with, to decide what journey you want to go on together, to understand that, like, this is frankly, it's our livelihood. And for us to sit around and just be like, oh, it's just business, like, but like, and it is, but it's so much more than that. And you have to align on values. And frankly, if you don't, at the end of the day, the product that you roll out, your customers, your end customers are going to be very attuned to the fact that, the values aren't there and aligned, and they're going to know. And they're back to those Gen Zers, they're not going to like you for it. Like they're going to call you out on it on like TikTok or something. Like it won't be good.
I'm super, look, I started my career in marketing. And so to me, watching over the last 30 plus years as the industry has pretty much ignored brand reputation and marketing as a cornerstone to building a good business, what this generation's demand for, quality and authenticity in brands, I think is going to be hugely important to the next generation of fintech winners. And, it's not rocket science to, appreciate how quickly inauthentic brands will suffer at the hands of their own their own stories, right?
Your own devices.
If I hear one more company use the term democratizing finance when their entire business model is based on essentially allowing trust fund kids to participate in markets that they otherwise wouldn't have been allowed to participate in, it doesn't feel too democratizing to me. But I think where and when a company can build real brand value and authenticity into their story, whether it's going public or generally, just building their business, I think they're going to have a huge advantage over the competition and over the other folks that are out there. And I think it's going to become important, more important than it's ever been before in financial services. And also, it's not like the incumbents have done a phenomenal job of managing reputation and brand and marketing as a service, right? So there's a lot of room there for our industry to take
to show how it's done.
Yeah.
I mean, how many more like SEC fines do we have to see come out of like an incumbent not marketing their product properly or marketing a fee properly or being like, this thing's free, enjoy this fintech product, it is free, and it's not free because there's like hidden fees. Like, okay, guys, let's like try to figure this out because this is insane. I love that because
an amazing impression of the drug disclaimers on the ads. Whenever the television's on or we're doing something, she'll be like, not to be used with da 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 da, and she just goes on. Yeah, we need you for sort of the disclaimers on a lot of these products and services.
Seriously, then maybe we can stop seeing all those fines. Maybe, I don't know, but yes, I mean that's okay. We got to recruit your daughter for that one because that's actually really funny. But totally agree. Storytelling is really going to be the thing to make a big difference for the fintech companies that really have an edge moving forward. And it's interesting to see how many are kind of revamping their own marketing strategies to be more social media focused and all that good stuff. So it'll be cool to see moving forward. Let's see. I know we don't have too much time left with you, but I do want to ask, and we've talked about so many amazing things. I love a good interview where I like throw my questions to the side and we just talk. That's exactly what has happened today. But the one thing I definitely want to get some of your thoughts on, is imposter syndrome. I find a lot of my audience members have asked me about that, and we talk about that a lot. And so, obviously being a female in male-dominated fields, and you in multiple versions of that, comes with its own unique set of challenges. So what are maybe some of your tips for getting past things like imposter syndrome and really just keeping your mental health in check?
Yeah, it's a great question. There was an article on the back page of the Financial Times yesterday, I think, and they were just talking about, there was a wonderful chart about the difference between men and women and the way they perceive imposter syndrome, right? That time and time again, you can see studies that show that men are more likely to pretend they can do something that they can't do, where a woman wants to get it right before she takes credit for it, etc. But the most exciting thing for a woman of my age that it turned out to show was that over time, as age, that starts to the gap closes completely. And I think what that's telling us is women in particular, and perhaps this will change and it won't be the same for my daughters, but with age, start to care a lot less about imposter syndrome. And I can certainly attest to that, having really become a senior executive in my 20s and then a CEO in my early 30s. I had a lot of imposter syndrome because I couldn't figure out how the heck I was doing what I was doing, right? And every day I was sort of questioning, what am I doing? Like if I just say something confidently, maybe they'll make sure they'll continue to believe that I know what I'm doing here. And I think that got me through a lot more than I probably realized in hindsight. But once I hit my 40s and now as I'm kind of on the edge of my 50s, I don't spend a lot of time, and I don't encourage anybody to spend a lot of time about worrying about what people think about you, because there will always be somebody that thinks something about you, and that can take your glory if you let them. And I encourage anybody that ever ask the question about whether I belong here or whether I have a right to be here. The answer is always yes. You do what you've got to do. Do it respectfully, do it kindly, do it thoughtfully, do it authentically, but do you. Don't worry about what people are thinking about you. Just get it done.
And bring your weird.
Bring your weird.
Exactly. Bring your weird. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Amy, for joining us. I will ask you one more question to just share your final thoughts. Amy, will you please tell us what the F we can expect from you and Anthemis next?
I think you can expect a little bit more of the same, right? We're going to keep putting it out there in a slightly different way than the rest of the world. We're going to keep investing in some amazing founders. We're going to keep spreading our love incredibly diversely. And we're going to build some really kick-ass companies together.
Hell yeah. Love it. Thank you so much, Amy. Again, that is a wrap on this episode of What the Fintech. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so honored that you are here and a part of this community. So thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Nicole.
Of course. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you loved this episode, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and you can find me on all your favorite podcast platforms. Until next time, talk to you soon.